All right, good evening, good morning, or good afternoon. This is Chapter 7 of Cryptological Aspects of ESP, and the name of this chapter specifically is The Potential Threat of PK to COMSEC. I'm just going to move right into this. This is actually a pretty interesting chapter. It's about 10 pages or so. But if you've noticed anything visually off the bat, that a lot of these documents have double spacing between the lines, so 50 pages actually isn't that much, 60 pages, things like that. So if you're going to read these on your own, you can get through them pretty quickly. All right, the potential threat of PK to COMSEC. In order to discuss the title question meaningfully, it appears we will have to consider two more basic questions. Is there strong evidence supporting the existence of PK phenomenon and its relationship to stressful situations, where frustration within a person causes the buildup of energy that expresses itself in PK demonstrations? What effect could such a phenomena have on the SIGINT community, signal intelligence community? If you're not familiar with that term or those capital letters there, SIGINT. There is significant evidence supporting the existence of the phenomena and its connection with frustration. The famous psychiatrist Hans Bender investigated two celebrated cases in Germany: the Rosenheim case of 1967 and the Bremen Boy case of June 1965. The Rosenheim case of 1967 was also investigated by two physicists, F. Nanger and G. Zuha, who also supported the reality of some of the unusual phenomena. It all began in late 1967 in a lawyer's office in Rosenheim, Bavaria. Neon lights blinked off and on, became unscrewed, electric light bulbs exploded, and usually high telephone bills were attributed to the number 0119. This was a number that you would call, known as dial a time number. So if you wanted to know what time it was, you would dial the number. That's interesting, but I'm not going to address that. The town sent the assistant director of the electric company and his electricians to investigate. Using a voltage recorder, they detected unexplained deflections, in parentheses, or up to 50 amps, associated with the strange phenomena. To rule out the possibility that the town's power supply was causing the unusual problem, a separate generator was used to provide the building with power. Still, it persisted. When physicists Kanger and Zuha observed the same phenomena, they also noted that the house voltage remained the same. This led them to conclude that the phenomena was not electrical, but that an unknown energy must have mechanically acted on the pointer of the recorder. We got a footnote there. It's just telling us poltergeist investigations in Germany, 1970. A team of parapsychological investigators headed up by psychiatrist Dr. Hans Bender was called on to the case. Dr. Bender suspected that this was a case of poltergeist, PK phenomena, and began to look for the unusual cause. A young person with unresolved conflicts. He found such a person in Anne-Marie Schoberl. She hated her work and impatiently awaited the end of each working day. She was most distressed in the late afternoon, the time when hundreds of calls were registered for 0119, the number of time. The phone was closely observed during these periods, but there was no dialing motion to be seen. Instead, it appeared that the girl's unconscious PK somehow seemed to have tampered directly with the switching elements inside the instrument. When the lawyer Sigmund Adam was told about the suspected PK occurrence, he joked, the N and D aren't close on the keyboard, but who knows, joked with Anne-Marie that the next thing you know, there'll be pictures twirling on the walls. Early the next Monday morning, the suggestion seemed to take effect. as heavy oil paintings were observed to twirl on the walls. This sounds like one of those debunking or fraud, films that investigators used to catch people, in the act of pretending to have these abilities. Bender's team also witnessed this, was able to film on videotape the movements of one painting as it rotated through an arc of 120 degrees. Or I forgot the gentleman's name, who used to go around in the 80s and debunk stuff on all the talk shows. He was able to film the video on tape, the movements of one painting as it rotated through an arc of 120 degrees. Anne-Marie went to Dr. Bender's laboratory at Freiburg to be tested for ESP and PK. It is noteworthy that the girl only scored above chance when her emotions rose to a high pitch during the course of Bender's psychiatric interviews. The Bremen case involved a 15-year-old boy, Heiner Schultz, who, it was claimed by witnesses, could cause objects to move without touching them. At first, the strange phenomena concerned flying dishes in a china shop. When witnesses realized that the phenomena only occurred when Heiner was in the shop, Dr. Bender was called in to investigate. To the amazement of Dr. Bender and his team of 3 men, the phenomena continued while the boy was under their observation. Later, when the boy was apprenticed, I don't know what that word is, to electricians, the phenomena took a bizarre twist, loosening sturdy cable hooks inserted into a concrete wall. When Dr. Bender set up a laboratory test, it also showed positive results. The scientific team inserted their own hooks into a concrete wall, and after assuring themselves that they were secure, placed the boy at a distance of 1 meter from the wall and closely observed. After a few minutes, they discovered the hooks were loose, but no one had seen them becoming so. When the Bremen boy and the Rosen girl were psychologically examined, the personality structures were found to be unstable. Both had little tolerance for frustration. In both, the frustration caused a rapid buildup of tensions for which neither had any normal outlet. A more conformist reaction to the same stressful environment might be to develop an ulcer or high blood pressure. Soviet scientists are well aware of the PK phenomena and have been conducting tests in Leningrad laboratory. The test subject is NS Kolagina, got it right this time, a woman who is reported to be able to move small objects at will. The laboratory belongs to Dr. G.A. Sergeyev, Doctor of Technical Scientists, cyberneticist, telecommunications expert, and neurophysicist. Sergeyev is the inventor of the wireless EEG or force field detector. Did anybody know that the EEG was originally called the force field detector? Makes you really, really wonder, what we're all going through when we enter the hospitals and when technologies are introduced to us, in one way, telling us how great they'll be and what they're actually for. The phenomena have been verified by several scientists, including the world-famous theoretical physicist Professor B. Terlecki, who suggests that some unknown kind of energy is responsible for the phenomena. The physician who studied Mrs. Kolagina during one experiment stated that the pattern of her reactions during the experiment reminds one of a stress alarm reaction, which tends to support Dr. Bender's findings. Let's just stop there. So, I think I might have brought it up in the first video or second video, but we have the pop culture reference to the comic books from Marvel Comics and DC Comics, where the X-Men were introduced, and the X-Men were basically mutants or altered humans. The term is mutants they use, but essentially what would happen there is that during puberty and post-pubescence and prepubescence, under stressful situations, a lot of them, that's when they exhibited their gifts and their powers. and it was usually due to some sort of trauma or stress. So the date of these documents, the date of these stories, and the publication of the X-Men, the invention of them, coming from Stan Lee and Jack Kirby is a bit coincidental, right? I mean, and never mind, we have Captain America and Spider-Man and Superman, and which would have been very old. Superman would have been Uberman, right? Or Wunderkind, which are German, or Ubermensch, or even going a little bit further back to say something like Nietzsche or Nietzsche, the will to power, man's will to power, and the ability to ascend. I just want to sit on that thought for a minute because it's the correlations are spot on. And for me personally, a little anecdote story. I've actually, I have a couple memories from when I was in my teens where I was in a couple of arguments with various times with people and girlfriends and stuff, and I was pushed pretty hard, not meaning physically abused, although that did happen, and I lived in neighborhoods with a lot of gangs where, at least to me, I was told we were in gangs, but I was often having my ass kicked and handed to me by multiple various street gangs and stuff. But through the arguments, we were usually at home, and it's usually with a good friend or a girlfriend or something like that. You're not really in public doing that, but when it got heated, the radio would go on or the lights would flicker and things like that. And that actually happened when I was younger as well, but the way I disregarded that, even my parents disregarded that, was we didn't really live in well-developed areas to begin with, and it wasn't like we lived in brand new urban homes or anything like that. They were very old buildings, so a lot of that was just attributed almost instantly to poor construction, old equipment, old building methods and things like that, which is pretty convenient too. So we're on the next paragraph here. Now let us consider the second question. How could this affect the signal intelligence community? The evidence suggests that the PK effect in times of stress and tragedy may be far more common than we suspect. The clock stopping at the time of death or accident, the picture falling apparently without cause when a sun is shot down over North Vietnam, and light bulbs blowing out with unusual frequency. In parentheses, only during times of high tension. Many of these minor incidents are quickly forgotten and usually reported to no one. Well, there you go. I feel like that paragraph just seals up what I said. As with most large organizations, many agency employees already display some sort of psychosomatic symptoms. So that's psychosomatic symptoms of stress, ulcers, high blood pressures, tics, etc. Yeah, we all get that. I mean, it happens. It takes a long time to weed through that stuff if you've ever had to work at a stressful job. And, I think most of us at a certain age realize that when we are able, if we're able to make that transition from a job that's causing us those things, there's a lot of downtime. We deliberately just immerse in downtime. Many psychological experts tell us that the unrelieved stress does not have to display itself in a particular symptom. Many different types will do just fine. Most are interchangeable, with a given individual often displaying a variety of different symptoms during his lifetime, even blending some. It is interesting to note the prevalence among executives of the socially acceptable success symptoms of ulcer, high blood pressure, and heart ailments. The twirling pictures in Rosenheim case indicate how symptoms may be altered merely by suggestion. So I guess that means that they were able to, it's like an inception where they tell her what might happen next because of a result, and then she manifests that result. With the increasing popularity and acceptability of ESP and PK, it is anticipated that PK symptoms will increase. If one accepts that such things are possible, it is certainly much more appealing to use your excess energy to destroy the source of your frustration, the computer, the telephone, the teletypewriter, than it is to destroy yourself. Just consider for a moment the temptation. One cannot be held responsible for such effects. Such getting back at the boss would be very hard to differentiate from outages with other causes. The adventurous aspect is fascinating all by itself. It would be appropriate at this point to ask our readers, is there a lot of pressure and tension in your office? Do you also have a much higher outrage rate or downtime than comparable offices? So here, it's even like an HR question, right? This would have been something they, even now, as we know, it's incorporated into the HR process where we have all these different new titles emerging, and these people may not even be aware of what they're responsible for, in terms of, documenting and watching and observing, and in some cases, I'm sure in the intelligence communities, certain people are cleared to know what to look for. But on a consumer level, right? If you're the HR director of a grocery store or a bank, I doubt you're being trained to look for these things, but you are trained to look at symptoms. It's like, your focus is diverted. You're given a new set of jargon or a lexicon, and you're set to look for a specific new taxonomy that they created, although it's mirrored and predicated on looking for people with this potential. It's just you don't know that. So we're on the next paragraph, next page here. Have you really isolated the cause of your malfunctions? Do these outages measurably degrade the efficiency of your operation? Perhaps it would be worthwhile to carefully compare the rate of accidents and outages or undetermined cause in our offices during times of stress and during more normal periods. Do the light bulbs in your house blow out more frequently when someone is under stress? You might keep a little graph of stress peaks. The correspondence might surprise you. That's a good phrase there. Your stress peaks. All of us could probably benefit from our stress peaks. That's actually a great visual way to monitor your stress. And even if it's not considered stress, but just maybe the things that annoy you or upset you, even if it was just like, hey, I'm gonna adjust my attitude a little bit and the way I respond to people and things, and figure out what's bothering me and what actually occurs when that spark, that hot feeling that comes across you, that might actually be part of this as well. As PK becomes more widely publicized and the methods of causing it more accurately determined, is it beyond the realm of possibility that the Soviets will attempt to use the PK capability to disrupt communications equipment with a discrete attack by a trained person, plan their world moves in such a manner that all major diplomatic or military thrusts are preceded by a prolonged period filled with stress, producing activities designed not only to frustrate and confuse our people, but also to produce PK effects in sufficient quantity to measurably degrade the operations of our critical command and control machinery, telecommunication, cryptographic, and computer hardware. So that leads into for me, what we call psyops, war theater, fake news, and from a legalese perspective, it's called IIED, which is an abbreviation for intentional infliction of emotional distress. Now, what's interesting here is that we have some pretty clear correlations to what's happening on a day-to-day level with what we call contemporary media. And what I find interesting also is that this paragraph is obviously written by someone who doesn't believe these things are already going on, like that their agency, the CIA or the NSA, isn't involved already in psyops and disruptive type stuff in other countries. So if chaos is the way to keep people from exhibiting their abilities, they're doing a great job of it. That, or on the opposite end, if you recall, boredom is what makes people lose that ability, or it sort of dwindles. And then sort of in between that, if we look at anger and boredom, we have entertainment, right? So the phrase that I've heard and I often repeat is entertaining us to death. And that's basically just keeping your mind preoccupied, keeping you busy. Ultimately, all of it's about keeping you preoccupied, keeping you busy on something else, so that you don't exhibit any of those things, either inadvertently or perhaps train yourself so well that you can not be distracted by these things. And I've personally met some people that I believe were trained like this, and with more of the stuff that I've read, it's clear that there are many other gifts that have stemmed out of this research, as well as if you're someone who's been able to really decode and understand all of the ancient and religious and esoteric texts in their proper context, or if you're someone who has a really refined grasp on the solar and seasonal cycles, and or electricity and radiation. It's most likely that if after a certain amount of time in the field you have figured out some very unusual patterns that you probably were never taught, maybe not have heard anybody ever really communicate, and you're kind of holding on to some knowledge yourself. Another paragraph here. Did I miss a sentence? No. Okay, so new paragraph. Personally target people they know have a PK effect who are working in critical command and control communications. Subject such persons to the appropriate stress so that they will radiate at a sufficient intensity to disrupt delicate computers. So there we go. That's someone who is targeting somebody they know. Excuse me, let me have a drink here. Or someone or a la X-Men, to instigate someone else to exhibit or emit their abilities in a manner of destruction. And then the last sentence: use talented psychics to project energy to cause electronic communications gear to malfunction. And that's an asterisk. And that asterisk is, this is feasible. That this is feasible has apparently been demonstrated by a psychic, Mrs. Olga Worrell, who cause effects in a cloud chamber experiment conducted by Dr. Robert N. Miller, a few typos in there, professor of chemical engineering at Georgia Institute of Technology, and Dr. Philip B. Reinhardt, head of the physics department at the Agnes Scott College in Atlanta, Georgia. Mrs. Worrell caused the effect from 600 miles away. So what did she cause? She causes effects in a cloud chamber experiment. Okay. I wouldn't even know how to disprove that really without. It is interesting that that Georgia has a lot of this as well, this research. Okay, so new paragraph. Appropriate recommendations are: efforts be made to ascertain whether known psychic talent within the Soviet bloc is presently associated with personalities known to be part of Soviet bloc signal intelligence or other intelligence activities. Efforts may be made through existing DoD or other facilities where possible to test the degree of vulnerability of U.S. classified communications and COMSEC equipments, devices, and materials to the ESP threat. Such testing should consider both the threat of the individual talented and reliable psychic and groups of such individuals arrayed against a single target. Any conditions promoting or hindering the ESP performance should be carefully noted. So, they're already figuring it out. We'll see later in other documents that the people that were involved in these experiments went on to later invent and devise methods of both interception and hindrance and shielding. And, it's still without getting too far into it, it's still my belief that most of that has been wrapped up in consumer goods, and that is most likely the best way to keep it secret. Just for example, I think anybody can go see this on the CIA Crest Library, but I forget what to search for. It may even be just a link on the front page of the CIA library. But they have their oldest ever declassified documents, and it is basically, they captured some documents from, I believe it's Germany, that showed Germans had invented like an invisible ink. Now, most of us remember what that's like as a child, or if you're young now, the joy of and the fun of playing with invisible ink. But they have the formulas, the chemicals, how to make it, and it's all right there. And this is, I think, the 30s or 40s. The document was dated. So all of us know that was obviously turned into a consumer good. Unless, a toy company serendipitously came up with the same thing, which I just don't believe, because it's my understanding, just having a broader view over all of this stuff more than the average person, that a lot of these people sooner than later left the agency environment and went into the corporate world or the political world, and as a means of furthering their career there, they might did do, and maybe inadvertently reintroduced secrets as company patents, right, to profit or to earn themselves an elevated position within the company. It may not have been nefarious, but I coming from a background of creative people, in terms of my employment, it was of the utmost importance for us to come up with our own ideas. It wasn't everyone was looked down upon if you were stealing ideas from other people or doing what corporate speak was called borrowed interest, where you would borrow an idea from someone and add upon it when at the end it was clearly copying. But let those people continue to confuse themselves. Most of us knew that they were doing. So next paragraph. An NSA representative be appointed to monitor any psychic tests performed on behalf of this agency to make certain that NSA requirements are properly tested, the tests are scientifically established and carried out, and the tests are tailored to the psychic gifts of the participants. All NSA requirements in this area be properly coordinated before any tests are begun. And then we have a selected biography and notes. It's Extrasensory Perception, International Conference of Psychological Studies, Psychological Reflections, an anthology of the writings of C.G. Jung. Jung's in here a lot. Actually, there's a lot of, there's a lot of names you're used to seeing, which is pretty, again, part of I think the overall psyops or whatever you want to call it. But I'm just going to scroll through these. You don't have to hear me read these out. Suggestions at a distance, beyond telepathy, ESP and personality, testing for extrasensory perception with a machine, modern experiments in telepathy. It looks like there's an Einstein reference there. Let's see what that says. Physical research today, Dr. J. West, MB, DPM, General Buckworth maybe, or Puckworth, and Company, Ltd, London, 1954, page 131. Almost everyone is agreed, for example, that ESP has been shown to exist. Far-seeing thinkers, from Socrates to Henry Sidgwick and Albert Einstein, have not doubted the importance of psychic phenomena. So, either, those of us that are listening to this, let me retract that before I even begin that thought. It's my memory that almost all bookstores disappeared in an instant. It's my memory that what we do find in bookstores now is like rage material. It's basically just rage and insightful emotional drivel. It's not. There was a time. I used to have clippings of some old newspapers that I would pick up from garage sales and books that I would find in garage sales that were from the educational books. Educational books, scholastic material, and those books were from the 30s and 40s. And I remember reading them and just thinking, none of my current school books are written like this. None of them talk to you this way. It's a very intelligent way to approach education. And in some of those articles, from the newspapers, it used to be common to just read about a new discovery or a new research or a new invention or something like that. That was usually the headline. And before that, in the 17 and 1800s, there were just all kinds of publications. If you dig deep on the internet, you'll find them. You'll find websites with who have taken those publications, and in some cases, the person went and just took a photograph of each page of their newspaper, and we're talking, 5 years worth of these publications, and compile them into a high-res PDF. And this kind of knowledge was commonly spoken about, if not referenced through subscription-based services, and the way everyone talks about it in the NSA or the CIA, it's I don't know. It is a huge ignorance, or perhaps there was just a large religious contingent within those intelligence groups or warmongers, or war was such a constant threat. Here, if we reference back to some of these other paragraphs, that war was such a persistent thing due to diplomacy and whatever was going on, right? We know some wars were real, some were fake, and others were completely unnecessary, and we know that there's people to blame for that now, today. But it's also possible that the authors themselves are just expressing a little bit of, they're trying to be objective too, and not a lot of people who have to write these things, what they do is they're given handwritten notes. At this time they were given handwritten notes, and because the higher level, more tenured people were used to doing the tracking slips and the writing things by hand, when the new technology came out, they didn't necessarily have to learn how to use it. So they would, obviously the younger people would be the ones responsible. So it's just possible that age and the typical compartmentalization, as well as secret fraternities and societies, which we know are also within the intelligence groups, there could have been covert opposition and covert support from any number of constituents or contingents, depending on how large they were. Over on the over on the right of the screen, I have two more documents here. One from the Air Force, the Air War College, actually specifically the Air War College, and then a advanced individual training for center lane personnel. It's not what you think it is. It's not like it's going to go in there and teach you how to do anything. It's not a 1, 2, 3 ABC kind of thing, and there's a reason for that. But if you want to look at those two documents on your own, go ahead. I will actually be reading through this one here. It's 50 pages or so, but I find it's an exposition, more or less, kind of a let's look to the future thing. Let's be, psychic warfare, exploring the mind frontier, written by a lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Air Force, and it's an interesting read. It's a bit scary, and I'll make some correlations and do some commentary like I do on these, but I'm going to get through this, which we're just about to do, Chapter 8. So, I'll be doing some other readings from some other material, and then I'll actually do some compilation pieces where I kind of skip through and use the documents that they wrote themselves, where they were doing like annual reports or 5-year look backs where they had to give a brief history to someone real high up and sort of compile everything for us, or for that high-level officer, so that they could get an overall view of what was happening and where everything came from and where it started and where it's going. Most of the programs seem to have stopped around 85 to 90s in the 1990s, with a few ending in 96, 97, 98. And then abruptly some other programs were just handed off to other people, namely the DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, and then everything stops after that. So after the Defense Intelligence Agency got it, after all these were, some of these were, killed off, some of these were turned into other programs and handed off to other agencies. After the DIA got it, it was shut down. So, well, I shouldn't say that. There's just no other declassified documents that really go beyond after that point where it was passed to the DIA. And that's interesting. That's worth noting, because the Defense Intelligence Agency is a pretty important component of our government and our military. But all right, that was the end of Chapter 7, and the next video will be Chapter 8, Defense Against ESP. Have a good night.